Chapter 1. The Final Note. It was the kind of night London society would remember for years. Outside the Royal Whodunit Opera House, the elite of the city spilled from polished limousines, wrapped in fur-lined cloaks and draped in silk and satin. The October air bit with a crispness that made the jewels on gloved hands sparkle brighter beneath the glow of the chandeliers and flashbulbs. Tonight was the highly anticipated return of La Vendetta di Regina, an Italian tragedy that hadn't graced the London stage for 13 years. But more than the opera itself, it was Belladonna Lisière, the French-Italian soprano with the voice of a fallen angel, who had pulled in the crowds like a royal coronation. At precisely 8 o'clock, the house lights dimmed. The first chord struck, and as the curtain rose, the audience was transported. Belladonna was magnetic. Every gesture, every note wrapped the crowd in tragic beauty. She wore a final act gown of deep midnight blue, and on her head rested a glittering tiara, not a prop, but a real diamond piece, lent by the show's patron, Sir Hugo Marchmont, magnate and tabloid king. And then the moment came. The death aria. Belladonna moved to center stage, her lips parted, the orchestra swelled, but instead of the final high C, a croak slipped from her throat. Her expression shifted, confusion, then pain. Her hands trembled as if struck by electricity. One foot staggered back. Then, to the horror of all, she collapsed. A single, shattering note from the violinist screeched across the silence before the conductor cut the orchestra dead. Gasps rose from the royal box. The curtain dropped quickly, followed by a stammered announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Miss Lisière has suffered a sudden medical emergency." But backstage, the word had already passed from whisper to certainty. Belladonna was dead. The dressing room was cordoned off within the hour. Inspector Colin Merton from Scotland Yard arrived just as Sir Hugo Marchmont, pale with tension, barked orders into his phone. Sir Hugo's wife, Lady Arabella, a vision in silver, sat clutching her handbag like a lifeline. On the make-up table, the Marchmont tiara sat abandoned. "Who handled the tiara?" Merton asked curtly. A voice spoke from the corner, calm but strained. "Only myself and Miss Lisière." The speaker was Judith Lorne, head of wardrobe in her late 30s, with sharp eyes and a habit of watching more than she spoke. "It was polished and delivered earlier that afternoon by the house butler," she added, "locked until Belladonna's final costume change." The autopsy results came the next morning. Poison. Not ingested, but absorbed. A rare neurotoxin, fast-acting. The skin beneath Belladonna's scalp showed faint traces. The poison had likely been applied to the tiara, and now a scandal was about to explode. A star, dead mid-performance. A priceless piece of jewelry possibly used as a murder weapon, and a dressing room visited by actors, assistants, admirers, all with access. All with motives. Sir Hugo, desperate to avoid bad press, sent a discreet message to an old acquaintance, one with a flair for discretion and the truth. In a quiet flat on Whitehaven Mansions, a man sat polishing the handle of his cane with delicate precision. He was short, his mustaches meticulously groomed, his shoes impossibly shiny. When the envelope arrived bearing Marchmont's personal seal, he merely raised a brow. He read the letter once, slowly, then he smiled. "Murder, among the music," Hercule Poirot murmured. "Ah, but of course, it is always the final note that must be perfect." He placed the letter down, picked up his gloves, and rang the bell for his coat. It was time, once again, to use the little grey cells. Chapter 2. The curtain never fell. By the time Hercule Poirot arrived at the Royal Whodunit Opera House the next morning, the grandeur of the previous night felt curiously faded. A light drizzle had begun to fall, turning the cobblestones slick. The opera house, so full of life and brilliance hours ago, now resembled a mausoleum in mourning. A uniformed constable at the side entrance hesitated, then stiffened with recognition. "Monsieur Poirot, you're expected." Poirot gave a slight nod and stepped inside. He wore a grey suit, pressed to perfection, with gloves the color of soft ivory and a black walking stick he carried more for style than support. His eyes swept the backstage corridor, long, dimly lit, smelling faintly of grease paint and wilting roses. He was met by Inspector Colin Merton, tall, dark-haired, and brisk in manner. The inspector extended his hand, which Poirot shook delicately. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you for coming. Frankly, I was half hoping this would be a straightforward medical case, but, well." Merton glanced toward the dressing rooms. "No doubt you've read the initial report." "Mais oui. The diva, she falls dead on the stage. The poison, most rare. Absorbed through the skin, très insidious, and the tiara, worth more than its weight in diamonds." Merton gave a tight nod. "We've been interviewing the staff. No one saw anything suspicious, of course. They never do. And yet everyone seems a little too polished in their answers." "People often are, Inspector," Poirot replied. "But the truth is, it cannot be smoothed so easily. Now, if I may, I would like to see the scene of the crime." He was led through a narrow hallway and into Belladonna Lisiere's dressing room. It was larger than expected, lavishly furnished with velvet chairs, a silver-framed mirror, and faint traces of lilac perfume still lingering in the air. Poirot moved slowly, his eyes catching every detail. A cracked teacup on the table, a single white rose in a vase, a feathered shawl draped carelessly over a chaise longue. He paused before the tiara. It rested on a velvet cushion, enclosed now in a glass case provided by Scotland Yard. Even through the barrier, it glittered seductively. But Poirot did not admire the jewels. His eyes were focused elsewhere. "Do you see, Inspector?" he asked softly. "See what?" Poirot pointed, not at the diamonds, but at the small black combs built into the sides, designed to secure the tiara in the hair. The ends were slightly discolored. Merton leaned in. "We tested it. The tips were laced with the toxin. Whoever applied it knew the contact would be close to the skin, hidden and effective." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Yes, but tell me, who handled the tiara last?" "Judith Lorne, head of wardrobe. She claims she wore gloves." "Gloves protect the hands," Poirot murmured, "but they do not guarantee innocence. She had access." "No." "They all did, monsieur. That's the problem." Poirot turned from the tiara and walked slowly around the room. On the floor by the chair, he noticed a faint smudge, a footprint, partially wiped, but still visible in the dust. A man's shoe, larger than Belladonna's own, not the standard black rubber sole of the stage crew. Something more refined. He crouched, examining it closely. "Was this noted?" he asked. Merton blinked. "No, I don't believe anyone saw it." Poirot stood up, brushing off his hands. "Then we must ask ourselves, who entered this room when they should not have?" An hour later, Poirot joined Inspector Merton in the orchestra pit for a list of principal staff. One by one, he heard the names. Judith Lorne, head of wardrobe, 12 years in service, fiercely protective of Belladonna. Elliot Graves, conductor. Brilliant, temperamental, had a rumored affair with the victim 5 years ago. Celeste Dupont, understudy, talented, beautiful, and, until last night, overshadowed. Marco Bellini, Belladonna's personal assistant, silent and cold-eyed, known for arranging her schedule and shielding her from the press. Sir Hugo Marchmont, patron, funder, lender of the tiara, and owner of half the British tabloids. Lady Arabella Marchmont, his younger wife, who once trained as an opera singer herself. René Valjean, a vocal coach flown in from Milan, suspiciously absent after the performance. Each had been close to Belladonna in one way or another. Each had access, each could have touched the tiara, and each had something to lose or gain from her death. As Poirot prepared to leave for the afternoon, he stood once more on the darkened stage. He closed his eyes. He could almost see her there, Belladonna, stepping forward beneath the lights, singing the final aria. He imagined the moment of collapse. The note is unfinished. The audience was stunned into silence, and someone watching her fall with quiet satisfaction. Poirot opened his eyes. "Murder at the Opera," he said softly. "Mon Dieu, it is the most sinister performance." Chapter 3. The cast assembles. The following morning, a private salon inside the Royal Bellanote Opera House was transformed into a temporary drawing room of inquiry. Thick velvet curtains muffled the outside world, while a silver tea-set rested untouched on the mahogany sideboard. Poirot stood by the window, his gaze fixed not on the street below, but on the reflections in the glass behind him. He watched each person enter with interest, not merely their expressions, but their postures, hesitations, and how they looked or did not look at each other. Inspector Merton arrived moments later with his notes and a grim look. "Everyone we requested is here," he said, gesturing toward the adjacent hall where a handful of chairs had been placed in a circle, each one with a story and a secret, no doubt. "Alors," Poirot said with a satisfied smile, "let us meet our players." Judith Lorne was called in first, dressed in neat black, her copper hair tied into a functional knot. She sat with her arms folded tightly. "I'm not here to perform," she said flatly. "Belladonna was difficult, but she didn't deserve this." Poirot leaned forward. "Madame, what did you observe on the evening of the murder?" "Nothing I haven't already told the inspector," she replied, casting a quick glance at Merton. "I dressed Belladonna myself. I placed the tiara on her head, wearing gloves, and secured it. She was calm, focused. Not chatty, but she never was before a performance." "Did anyone else enter the dressing room?" "Just Marco, her assistant. He came in to confirm her cues." "You trusted him?" Judith hesitated. "I don't trust anyone who makes themselves invisible." Poirot made a small note. "Merci, madame. You may wait outside." Elliot Graves, the conductor, entered with a flourish. Elegant in a dove-grey waistcoat and perfectly groomed, he looked more like a theatre critic than a maestro. He flopped into the chair dramatically. "Theatre is death, Monsieur Poirot. Last night, it simply skipped the metaphor." "You knew Belladonna well." Graves smiled without warmth. "Well enough to admire her, not well enough to mourn." "And yet you had history," Merton interjected. Graves shrugged. "A kiss backstage in Vienna 5 years ago. She broke it off, said I was too fragile. Imagine." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Did you have access to the tiara?" "I never touched the wardrobe department's treasures," he said, then added with a smirk, "though I suspect others did." "Others like who, Monsieur Graves?" He looked thoughtfully toward the door. "Ask the understudy." Celeste Dupont followed, her beauty unmistakable even in modest attire. She sat primly, her hands folded in her lap, but her voice carried a tremor. "She was cruel," Celeste whispered. "Belladonna. She mocked me in front of the crew, said I had no soul in my voice. She threatened to have me removed from the production." "Did she have that power?" Poirot asked gently. "She thought she did. Sir Hugo always bent to her wishes." "Where were you when she died?" "In the wings, ready to go on in case she faltered." I saw her fall. I thought... Her voice caught in her throat. I thought it was part of the performance. Poirot did not speak for a moment. Then, "Did you ever try on the tiara?" "No," she said quickly. "Why would I?" "But it would have suited you, no?" She looked down. "Yes, perhaps." Marco Bellini arrived next, silent and precise in his movements. Dark-haired, with an impassive face, he seemed carved from stone. "You were Belladonna's personal assistant," Poirot said. "That is a position of great trust." "I managed her time," Marco replied. "Protected her privacy. Controlled access." "Then you controlled who entered her dressing room?" "Yes. And yet the tiara was poisoned," Merton said. Marco's mouth barely moved. "Not by me." "Where were you during her final costume change?" 10 feet away, waiting outside. I heard nothing unusual." Poirot studied him. "Did she have enemies, Signor Bellini?" "She had rivals. Never equals." "A subtle distinction," Poirot said quietly. Sir Hugo Marchmont swept into the room like a storm in tailored wool. "Poirot, you must understand. This is not only a tragedy, it's a scandal. I'm being crucified in the press. They're calling it the opera assassination. Do you know how many calls I've had from the French ambassador? And yet," Poirot said, "it was your tiara, was it not? It was locked in a custom box. Only Judith and Belladonna had access. My wife wore it once, years ago, for a portrait. And who last handled it before the performance? Judith collected it from our private vault yesterday, with my permission." Poirot nodded. "And how well did you know the victim?" Sir Hugo gave a tired smile. "She was brilliant, difficult, and frankly exhausting, but she made headlines." Poirot said nothing. The silence pressed. Sir Hugo shifted uncomfortably. "I had no reason to kill her." Poirot didn't respond. The eyes said enough. Lady Arabella Marchmont entered last, graceful, poised, her voice delicate but cold. "She stole my life," she said softly. "Not literally, but I was once a soprano too. Until I married Hugo, Belladonna had the voice I never achieved, and she knew it. Did you envy her?" "Every woman envied her. But envy is not murder." "Where were you when she died?" "In our private box, drinking too much champagne, wishing the performance would end." Poirot's eyes lingered on her. "And the tiara? You once wore it?" "Yes. Briefly. It pinched. I never wore it again." She stood to leave, but turned back. "Do you think I killed her, Monsieur Poirot?" "I think," he said, "that everyone here has played a role in her final performance." Chapter 4. Poirot takes the stage. After the final interview, the salon cleared. The suspects, no, the ensemble, Poirot thought, dispersed like dancers after the curtain falls. Yet something lingered in the air, a tension, a note left unresolved. Inspector Merton looked exhausted. He dropped into the nearest chair, loosening his collar. "Well? Any thoughts, Monsieur Poirot? We've heard from the whole cast." "I can't say anyone struck me as obviously guilty." Poirot stood near the tea service, his fingertips resting on a porcelain cup he had not touched. "No, Inspector. It is like the overture of an opera. Each instrument reveals only fragments. The melody, the harmony, they will come." Merton sighed. "If it's all the same to you, I prefer evidence to metaphor." Poirot gave a small smile. "And yet you yourself noted it earlier. Everyone seems polished. Too polished." Merton nodded. "Yes. Their answers were too prepared. Too clean." "Indeed. And murder, mon ami, is never clean." He walked slowly to the table where he had placed his small black notebook. He opened it with care. "Let us list what we have observed. Not what is explained, but what is unusual." He began to speak, ticking off points with each finger. "First, Belladonna's death occurs on stage before hundreds, yet only one method of contact, the tiara. Second, the poison, rare and requiring precision, applied likely only to the inner combs. Third, Judith Lorne claims she wore gloves. Possible. But what if the poison was applied after she placed it on Belladonna's head? Fourth, the footprint in the dressing room. A man's. Not Judith. Not Belladonna. Fifth, the victim's teacup was untouched, but her shawl, faint perfume, not hers. Lilac. Perhaps it was moved. Poirot paced. Motive, too, is plentiful. Judith. Resentment and proximity. Elliot Graves. Spurned lover and performer's pride. Celeste. Envy, ambition. Marco. Silence can hide devotion or disdain. Sir Hugo. Investment, power, scandal. And Lady Arabella. She's a study in repression. Merton rubbed his temples. So, we know everyone had access. Everyone had motive, but no proof. Poirot raised one finger. Yet, we must be patient. It is like the opera itself. Every act must play before the finale. That afternoon, Poirot requested a quiet tour of the opera house, alone. He began in the orchestra pit, admiring the acoustics. Then backstage, where flats and ropes waited in ordered silence. Then the dressing rooms. Each door, each corridor. Poirot moved through them as though tracing invisible footsteps. He paused at Belladonna's dressing room, then turned sharply and entered the adjacent one. A small placard on the door read, Celeste Dupont. It was modestly furnished. A cracked mirror, cheap flowers wilting, a faint scent of vanilla. But it was not the room that interested Poirot. It was the distance. He stepped between the two doors, only 3 paces apart. Close enough to hear, close enough to act. He tapped the wall lightly between the rooms. Hollow, perhaps a shared ventilation duct or storage panel. He continued upward, to the upper wings, where the understudies waited during performances. Then he found the narrow stairwell that led to the catwalk above the stage. There, only crew were permitted. And perhaps one determined killer. Poirot's fingers brushed against a hanging cable. He looked down to the stage below. His expression remained unreadable. That evening, Poirot dined alone in his suite. But he was not idle. From his leather valise, he removed a portfolio of documents sent earlier by Inspector Merton. Belladonna's financial records, letters, a copy of her final will. Among them, one letter caught Poirot's eye, dated 2 weeks ago, written on thick cream-colored paper. The signature smudged, but it was the recipient that drew his attention. 2. Sir Hugo Marchmont, reinsurance clause on performance jewelry. Urgent concerns. Poirot's eyes narrowed. He stood, walked to his writing desk, and penned a brief note. Inspector Merton, please confirm. Who handled the insurance appraisal of the Marchmont tiara? Was it increased recently? Who stood to benefit from the insurance payout in case of loss or damage? Humbly, H.P. He sealed the note and rang for the concierge. As he returned to his seat, Poirot murmured to himself, Murder, yes, but not only of the body. There is murder of reputation, of opportunity, of trust, and someone, Inspector Merton, has committed all 3. Chapter 5. First Interviews. Begin the following morning, Hercule Poirot arrived once more at the Royal Bellanote Opera House. The grey skies above had cleared, but the atmosphere inside remained heavy with tension. Word of Belladonna's mysterious death had spread through London like fire in dry grass. The newspapers were ruthless. Death at the high sea, declared one. Another ran a dramatic headline. Was it murder in the spotlight? In a modest rehearsal room lined with costume racks and mirrors, Poirot had arranged a series of private interviews. One by one, the players would return. not to perform, but to reveal. He began with Judith Lorne. She entered briskly, carrying a clipboard and wearing the same professional air as before, but there was something tight in her jaw. She sat across from Poirot, back straight. "Mademoiselle Lorne," Poirot began, "you were the last person to place the tiara upon Mademoiselle Lissiere's head. Oui? I've said so already. I wore gloves. There was no contact." "Indeed. And tell me, when you retrieved the tiara from the Marchmont vault, was it in your sole possession from then until the performance?" She hesitated. "Yes, I suppose. I kept it in a locked case, inside my office." "You suppose? Well, Marco came in that afternoon to collect Belladonna's rehearsal shoes. The tiara case was in plain view, but I wasn't out of the room long." "Ah." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "So you left the case unattended? For 2 minutes at most." 2 minutes, Poirot echoed. Long enough, perhaps, for someone who knew precisely what they were doing. Judith said nothing. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard. "Tell me, did you admire her? Belladonna?" A bitter laugh. "Admire her? Professionally, yes. Personally? No. She was vain, demanding, cruel when bored, but she was also the best I ever dressed." Poirot made a note. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may go." Next was Marco Bellini. He entered silently, his expression unreadable. Poirot gestured for him to sit. "You were very loyal to Mademoiselle Lissiere, yet you were a man of few words." "She didn't require words," Marco replied. "She required silence, efficiency, and discretion. I provided all three." "Indeed. And what of that afternoon? Did you touch the tiara?" "No." "Did you see anyone else do so?" "No." "Even when you were left alone in the wardrobe office?" A slight pause. "I did not touch the tiara." "Touch, perhaps not," Poirot said. "But notice something." "Move something?" Marco leaned forward. "You think I killed her. I didn't." "I think," Poirot said. "You know more than you say. And your silence, it is not always a virtue." Marco's jaw clenched, but he remained seated until dismissed. Then came Celeste Dupont. She entered wearing a pale blue scarf and a nervous smile. Her eyes darted to the mirror behind Poirot, as though trying to glimpse herself, reassure her presence. "Mademoiselle Dupont," Poirot said, "how did you feel about being understudy to Belladonna?" "I was honored, at first," she replied. "But Belladonna was territorial. She mocked me. She told Sir Hugo I would embarrass the stage. And yet her death opened the stage to you, did it not?" Her expression shifted. "I didn't want her to die." "But you wanted the spotlight." She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "Yes, I did. But not like this." Poirot leaned back. "You never tried on the tiara? Not even once?" "No, of course not." "But perhaps you wished to see yourself in her place?" Her voice dropped. "I dreamed of it, but I never dared." Poirot gave a small nod, watching her face as she left. Dreams, he knew, could be powerful motives. Elliot Graves was next. He entered humming a few bars of La Vendetta di Regina, then abruptly stopped. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, taking a seat and stretching out his long legs, "have you ever loved someone whose voice could destroy you?" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "An intriguing question." "I loved her once," Graves admitted. "Belladonna, or at least the idea of her." "And yet she rejected you." Graves gave a dry smile. "She rejected everyone eventually." Poirot shifted. "And how did she treat you in this production?" "She refused to rehearse with me unless the lights were adjusted just so. She sent anonymous complaints to the press about my tempo. She threatened to walk out. And yet you stayed." "I am a conductor, Monsieur Poirot. I remain until the final bow." Poirot observed him in silence for a moment. "Tell me, Graves, do you believe she was murdered?" The conductor's smile vanished. "Yes," he said quietly, "because only murder could quiet her." Lastly, Poirot interviewed Lady Arabella Marchmont. She arrived with perfect posture, draped in ivory silk. Her eyes were guarded, and her movements slow, calculated. "Madame," Poirot began, "you wore the tiara once, years ago." "Yes, for a portrait. It gave me a headache. And now you've given it to a soprano who will never sing again." Her lips tightened. "Are you implying I had something to do with this?" "I imply nothing. I only seek the truth. You dislike Belladonna, no? She was everything I trained to be, everything I failed to become. I watched my husband pour millions into her career. She eclipsed me, even in my own home." "Envy," Poirot said softly, "is not always green. Sometimes it glitters." Lady Arabella rose to leave. "Careful, Monsieur Poirot. Jealousy is a performance no woman enjoys being accused of." She left with a rustle of silk and the scent of sandalwood. As the door closed behind her, Poirot folded his notebook slowly. "Ah," he said aloud, "the masks begin to slip." Chapter 6. The Woman in the Photograph. The morning after Poirot's tense conversation with Inspector Lestrade, the Belgian detective sat quietly in the corner booth of the inn's small breakfast room. A cup of strong coffee steamed beside him, untouched. He was staring intently at a black and white photograph laid flat on the table. The same photograph Mr. Filbert had shown him earlier, taken on the platform minutes before the train vanished. Poirot's eyes narrowed. There was something off. Not in the faces, not in the shadows. It was in the background. A barely visible figure near the edge of the frame. A woman in a long flowing coat and wide-brimmed hat, her face turned just enough to reveal a partial profile. He had seen that face before. "Ah," he murmured to himself. "La femme inconnue." He gently slid the photograph into his pocket and stood, brushing a few crumbs from his immaculate cuffs. "It is time for a small promenade," he said quietly, "and perhaps some answers." The train station looked as tired as ever, its stone walls weathered by time, the fog rolling low across the empty platform. Poirot approached the station master's office and tapped politely on the glass. An older man with wire-rimmed spectacles peered up. "Morning, sir. Need a ticket?" "No, merci. I come not for travel, but for inquiry." Poirot pulled out the photograph. "You were working the night the Blackbridge Express vanished, yes?" The station master nodded slowly. "I've worked here for 27 years, never seen anything like it. Still haunts me." Poirot laid the photograph gently on the desk and pointed to the shadowy figure. "This woman, do you recognize her?" The man leaned in, adjusted his glasses, and frowned. "She's familiar. Think she's from town. Might be Miss Carroway. Lives up near the cliffs." Poirot's eyebrows rose. "Merci. You have helped more than you know." The Carroway estate sat brooding atop the chalk cliffs that overlooked the sea. The house was tall, Victorian, with latticed windows and ivy clinging to the walls like veins. Poirot climbed the winding path with care, his polished shoes crunching on gravel. As he reached the heavy oak door, it creaked open before he could knock. A pale woman in her 40s stood there. Her face bore a faint resemblance to the woman in the photograph, but now older, more drawn. Her eyes held a strange intensity, like someone who lived too long in a house with secrets. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice soft and low. "I am Hercule Poirot. I'm investigating the disappearance of the Blackbridge Express. Might I have a moment of your time, mademoiselle?" She hesitated, but then stepped aside. "Come in." The parlor was filled with the scent of dried roses and dust. Bookshelves lined the walls, and old clocks ticked in disharmony. Poirot sat across from Miss Carroway as she poured tea with shaking hands. "You were at the station the night the train disappeared," Poirot began gently. Her hands paused mid-pour. I was. I went to see someone off, my cousin. Do you recall anything unusual? A noise, a light, something impossible?" She looked at him for a long moment, then set the teapot down with a soft clink. "I saw a man. Tall, wearing a hat pulled low over his face. He brushed past me as I left the platform. I remember because he wasn't walking. He was gliding, no footsteps, just movement." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And did anyone else see this man?" "No one mentioned him, but I've seen him before. Weeks before the train vanished, he'd be at the station just watching, never boarded, never spoke." A cold silence hung in the air. Poirot leaned forward. "This man, did he ever come here? To your home?" A flicker of fear passed over her features. "Once. Late at night. I heard tapping at my window, and when I looked, he was there, just standing in the garden, watching. I turned away to call the police, and when I looked back, he was gone." As Poirot left the estate, the sky had grown grey, rain threatened the horizon, and gulls circled like omens. Back in town, Poirot met with Hastings at the inn. "She's hiding something," Poirot said. "But not guilt, fear, genuine fear. The man she describes, he is not just a figment. He connects to the train, to the disappearance." "But how?" Hastings asked. "And who is he?" Poirot tapped his fingers on the table. "That, mon ami, is what we must discover. The answers lie not in who vanished on the train, but in who stayed behind." Just then, the door burst open and Inspector Lestrade entered, soaked in rain and out of breath. He tossed a folder onto the table. "Poirot, you'll want to see this. We traced the records of a passenger who was listed aboard the train but never existed. Name was James Nettle, ticket purchased, seat assigned, but no one by that name has ever lived in the county." Poirot opened the file, scanning quickly. "Nettle?" he murmured. Yes. A nettle stings when touched." He suddenly looked up, eyes alight. "Lestrade, may I borrow this file?" "Of course." "Why?" "Because, my dear Inspector," Poirot said, standing, "I believe we are chasing a ghost with very human hands." Chapter 7. The First False Lead. The sun was pale behind a veil of London mist as Poirot returned to the Opera House the next morning. The building seemed more sombre now, as though mourning its prima donna in silence. The rehearsal stage was empty, the velvet curtains partially drawn, like half-closed eyes. Inspector Merton met him just inside the side entrance, holding a folded sheet in one hand and a peculiar expression on his face. "We may have something, Poirot," Merton said. "It's about Graves, the conductor." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Ah? Do tell." "Financial records," Merton explained. "Turns out Elliot Graves recently made a rather large payment, several £1,000s, to a private apothecary. Cash. No paper trail until we went digging." Poirot's brow furrowed. "An apothecary?" "Yes. Specializes in rare botanical compounds. When we cross-referenced the purchase, one of the items matches the toxin used to kill belladonna." Poirot said nothing at first. He slowly walked toward the main stage and gazed up at the ornate opera boxes. His voice, when it came, was soft. "That is very interesting." "Interesting," Merton said, incredulous. "It's damning. Motive, opportunity, access to poison." He conducted the performance, knew the cues, and the payment was made just days before the murder. Poirot nodded slowly. "Oui, it is certainly compelling. But what of method? Elliot Graves does not enter the dressing room. He does not handle the tiara." "He could have passed the poison to someone else," Merton insisted. "Paid them to apply it." "Perhaps. But then he would be risking betrayal, blackmail, exposure. Non, the man is proud, vain, not foolish. Still, Merton said, he's at the top of the list now. We're bringing him in for formal questioning. Poirot did not object, but something in his eyes remained distant, unsatisfied. Elliot Graves arrived under protest, flanked by 2 constables, and sat in the salon with theatrical contempt. He crossed his legs with a flourish and narrowed his eyes at the inspector. "This is absurd," he said. "I'm not a criminal. I'm a conductor." Poirot stepped forward. "Then perhaps you will conduct yourself with clarity, Monsieur Graves. Why did you purchase a rare poison days before Belladonna's death?" "I didn't," Graves snapped. "I bought a collection of rare extracts for an experimental garden. My brother is a botanist." "An expensive gift?" "I can afford it." Poirot folded his arms. "The poison in question is not found in England. It is native to South America, used primarily for ceremonial purposes, and in very specific murders." "I didn't touch Belladonna," Graves said firmly, "and I didn't poison her." Poirot tilted his head. "Do you deny the delivery?" "No, but I never opened the parcel." "Then who did?" Graves hesitated. "I left it in my dressing room during rehearsal. Anyone could have—" His voice cut off. Poirot stepped closer. "Ah, so now we have a parcel, unattended, and a murderer who perhaps did not buy poison, but borrowed it." Graves' eyes darted between Poirot and Merton. "You think someone used me?" "Oui," Poirot said, eyes gleaming. "That is exactly what I think." After Graves was released under watch, Poirot returned to the stage once more, deep in thought. He stared not at the seats or the curtain, but at the wings, the hidden spaces, the only places the crew moved freely. It was there he noticed the dust trail, subtle, fine, barely visible against the dark floorboards, leading from the conductor's pit toward backstage, a faint white powder, like crushed chalk. "Interesting," Poirot murmured. He followed it quietly. Backstage, the trail disappeared beneath a costume rack. Poirot crouched, lifting the edge of the fabric. Beneath it, he found a folded cloth, stained faintly with gray residue. He called for Merton. When the inspector arrived, Poirot handed over the cloth. "We must test this. It may be the missing link." "Between Graves and the tiara?" "No," Poirot said. "Between someone clever enough to use Graves as a smokescreen and someone foolish enough to leave a trace." That evening, the test results came back. The cloth was laced with a diluted form of the same rare toxin, but more importantly, it bore fingerprints, not Elliot Graves, but Marco Bellini's. The next morning, Marco was brought in again. This time, his calm demeanor had fractured. His eyes darted, his jaw clenched. Poirot addressed him gently. "Marco, the cloth was found backstage. It is not Graves who handled it. It is you." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Do not lie. You retrieved the parcel. You opened it. Why?" Marco remained silent. Poirot leaned forward. "You are not the killer, but you are complicit. Perhaps you knew Belladonna would die, or perhaps someone used you, bribed you, threatened you." "I didn't." Marco stopped, swallowed, then finally whispered, "I didn't know she would die." Poirot's voice was barely a murmur. "Then what did you know?" Marco stared at the floor. I was told to deliver something. A small vial, place it in Judith's supply drawer. That's all. I didn't ask questions." "Who told you?" He shook his head. "If I say, they'll ruin me. Or worse." Poirot stepped back, arms crossed. "Then you have chosen silence over justice. Très bien. But you have confirmed one thing. Graves was not the killer." Merton looked stunned. "Then who the hell was?" Poirot turned slowly toward the dressing rooms. Ah, he said softly. Now we look not for who had poison, but who had a stage to lose. Chapter 8. The psychological game begins. The opera house had begun to breathe again. With Belladonna Lisière gone, rehearsals had tentatively resumed under a heavy, whispering cloud. Celeste Dupont now stood where the diva once reigned. Center stage, nervously clutching a sheet of music as her voice trembled through the great hall. It was not confidence that carried her performance, but the weight of possibility. Poirot sat discreetly in one of the middle rows, watching not the stage, but the reactions. Judith Lorne stood in the wings, arms crossed, eyes fixed, not on Celeste, but on the tiara, now resting in a velvet-lined box on a nearby pedestal. Sir Hugo Marchmont was perched in the back row, a cigar unlit in his hand, chewing the end nervously. Lady Arabella did not attend the rehearsal. Inspector Merton joined Poirot quietly, whispering, "We've increased surveillance on Bellini. If he's hiding more, we'll know soon." "Let him feel the pressure," Poirot replied. "It is like boiling a kettle. The steam always finds a crack." Merton nodded, then pointed toward the stage. "Celeste has certainly stepped into the role quickly." "Ah," Poirot murmured. "But is she stepping forward, or being pushed?" After rehearsal, Poirot approached Celeste in the dressing-room hallway. She was removing her stage makeup with hurried strokes, her reflection fractured in the mirror's uneven glass. "Your performance today," Poirot said gently, "was full of emotion." "I'm trying," she replied. "Everyone's watching me. Some want me to fail. You sound afraid." Celeste glanced at him in the mirror. "Shouldn't I be? Belladonna died wearing that tiara. It could have been me." Poirot tilted his head. But it was not. And yet someone took great effort to ensure the poison would affect only one person. Her hands stilled. "What are you implying? That this was not a crime of chance, but of precision and motive?" Celeste stood abruptly. "I didn't kill her. I did not say you did, but perhaps you knew someone who would benefit from her absence." She stepped back, her voice rising. "I waited 5 years to sing on that stage, and now you think I arranged murder for applause?" Poirot's voice remained soft. "I think you are under more pressure than you admit. Tell me, has anyone approached you, threatened you, promised you anything?" "No," she paused. "Not directly." "Indirectly." Celeste opened her mouth, then closed it. I don't know. Things have changed so fast. I don't know who to trust." Poirot stepped closer. "Then trust me, mademoiselle, before the curtain falls, for you." Later that evening, Poirot gathered all remaining suspects for a private gathering in the Marchmont salon. No police, no notes. Only silence, candlelight, and Poirot's steady presence at the head of the room. Judith, Sir Hugo, Lady Arabella, Elliot Graves, and Celeste sat uneasily, their eyes flickering like the flames around them. "I've called you together," Poirot began, "not for accusation, but illumination. Each of you has stood on this stage of suspicion, but the time has come to lift the mask." Lady Arabella scoffed. "And what do you expect us to do, Monsieur Poirot? Confess?" "No, madame, but I believe guilt reveals itself, not only through words, but through the cracks in silence." He turned to Judith. "You were closest to Belladonna. You handled the tiara. Did you notice anything unusual about her that day?" Judith stiffened. She was unusually calm. "I thought it odd. She normally barked demands, but she said nothing." "Did she know something was coming?" Judith hesitated. "I thought maybe she had decided to retire. There was something final in the way she moved." Poirot turned to Graves. "You said you never saw her again after rehearsal?" Graves nodded. "Correct. But Celeste, Poirot said, pivoting. "You were in the wings. Did you hear anything strange? A conversation, perhaps?" Celeste shook her head. "Just the usual calls. I had to stay focused in case she dropped out." "And you, Sir Hugo?" "I was in the audience," he replied, eyes narrowed. "Where I belonged." Poirot slowly walked to the center of the room. "Then let us consider something together, mes amis. What if the murder was not planned in the days before the performance, but months before?" The room went still. Poirot continued. "The poison may have been introduced recently, yes, but the intent, that was older. Hidden beneath gestures, rehearsals, casual conversations. Someone built their alibi as carefully as an aria." He turned back to Lady Arabella. "You, madame, claim to have been in your private box during the performance, but the usher does not recall seeing you until after the first intermission." Arabella's jaw tightened. "Your perfume, lilac, was detected on Belladonna's shawl. Explain that." She folded her arms. "We hugged backstage that morning. I offered her luck." "She detested you," Poirot said. "Why would she accept such a gesture?" Arabella said nothing. Poirot's gaze swept the group once more. "I do not yet know the full truth," he said. "But I know this. Someone in this room fears discovery more than they ever feared Belladonna." He stepped back, his voice low and measured. "And tomorrow, mes amis, I will find their weakness. For the mind, like music, always leave a trace." Chapter 9. A Second Crime Behind the Curtain. It was shortly after dawn when a shrill scream shattered the fragile quiet of the Royal Bellanote Opera House. Poirot, already awake and reading by the light of the window in his hotel suite, set down his book with a frown. Moments later, a loud knock came at his door. It was Inspector Merton, looking pale and alarmed. "There's been another incident," he said grimly. "Backstage." Poirot was already reaching for his coat. The scene backstage was chaotic, though hushed voices tried to contain the panic. A few members of the stage crew and one of the violinists stood whispering in corners as Merton led Poirot down a narrow corridor behind the dressing rooms. Judith Lorne was standing outside the props room, her face drained of color. Inside the small room, on the dusty floor near a broken shelf of antique opera props, lay the crumpled form of Marco Bellini, unconscious but alive. Blood trickled from a wound at the base of his skull. A brass candlestick lay beside him, streaked with dark red. Merton crouched beside the body, his voice low. "Someone tried to kill him. He's breathing, but not well." Poirot examined the room with narrowed eyes. The shelf above Marco had been recently disturbed. Several faux jewel boxes and porcelain opera masks lay shattered across the floor. One heavy velvet curtain had fallen partially, as though dragged down during a struggle. Poirot moved with care, lifting one of the broken masks and then peering behind the curtain. Something glimmered faintly, a button, small and pearly, caught on a nail. He held it up. Merton leaned closer. "That doesn't belong to Marco." "No," Poirot agreed. "But perhaps it belongs to someone who feared what Marco might say." Hours later, Marco was stable but unconscious, lying in a private hospital room under police guard. Poirot stood beside the bed, hands clasped behind his back. He was on the verge of revealing something, Poirot said. He hinted that someone gave him the vial, that he acted as a pawn. Merton stood at the window. "And now someone's tried to silence him permanently." Poirot nodded. "They failed, but barely. Whoever it was panicked. They saw the walls closing in." Merton turned. "You think it was Graves again?" "No. Graves is too proud to sneak backstage with a candlestick, and his alibi this morning is solid. He was at the rehearsal hall across town. Judith, too careful, and she would use poison again, not blunt force." Poirot paused, deep in thought. No, this attack was impulsive. Clumsy. It was not planned like Belladonna's death. It was born of fear. He turned suddenly. We must gather them again. That evening, Poirot requested the presence of the same suspects once more. This time, the meeting took place not in the Marchmont salon, but on the opera stage, beneath the great chandelier, surrounded by rows of empty seats. They stood awkwardly in a semicircle. Judith Lorne, Celeste Dupont, Elliot Graves, Lady Arabella, and Sir Hugo. Poirot, standing before them, held up the small button between two fingers. "This," he said softly, "was found beside the attempted murder of Marco Bellini." Judith stepped forward. "Is he alive?" Poirot confirmed. "But unconscious." Celeste gasped. "Why would anyone attack Marco?" "Because he knew something," Poirot said, "and someone here feared he might say it." He turned slowly. "This button belongs to a coat worn earlier this week by you. Lady Arabella." Arabella's eyes flashed, but her voice was steady. "That proves nothing. I've worn many coats. It could have fallen at any time." Poirot stepped forward. "Except your maid confirmed that very coat was missing a button this morning. She attempted to mend it, but the thread had been cleanly torn." Arabella's jaw clenched. "Furthermore," Poirot continued, "you were absent from the rehearsal. No one can account for your whereabouts between 7 and 8. Sir Hugo shifted uncomfortably. "Arabella?" She turned to him, her voice cold. "You think I hit someone over the head with a candlestick?" Poirot said, "You may not have planned it, but in panic people act strangely, especially when reputations and fortunes are at stake." Arabella exhaled slowly. "I had nothing to do with Belladonna's death." "No," Poirot said. "But perhaps you had everything to do with covering for someone who did." He watched her carefully. "Marco's attack tells me one thing. The murderer is afraid. That fear, mes amis, is the crack in their perfect performance." As the suspects were dismissed one by one, Judith lingered behind. Poirot looked at her curiously. "You're getting close, aren't you?" she asked. "Very." Judith lowered her voice. "Then you should know. Belladonna received a letter the night before she died. I saw it on her vanity. Handwritten. She was visibly shaken." "A letter? Where is it now?" "I don't know. It was gone the next morning." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And you did not mention this before?" "I didn't think it mattered." Poirot shook his head. "On the contrary, it may matter more than anything." As Judith disappeared down the corridor, Poirot turned back to the empty stage. Now, the opera had two crimes, and in both, the killer had made a mistake. He would find them, not by chasing shadows, but by drawing out the one role they could not play: innocence. Chapter 10. Hidden connections emerge. A soft drizzle cloaked London in a grey veil as Poirot returned to the Marchmont estate later that evening. Though the rain dampened at the world outside, inside the house of Lord and Lady Marchmont, tensions ran hot. A butler ushered him into the library, where Sir Hugo Marchmont waited, half sunken into a leather armchair with a drink in hand, and his walking stick leaning against the side. "Monsieur Poirot," Sir Hugo said tiredly, "you said it was urgent." Poirot remained standing. "Indeed. You see, there is a thread unraveling behind these events, and I believe you are sitting at the edge of it." Sir Hugo's brow furrowed. "Are you accusing me now?" "Non. I accuse no one. Yet. I inquire. And I find things always in the details. You were Belladonna's patron for over 6 years. Generous, protective, and, some might say, unusually so." Sir Hugo sat up straighter. "I admired her talent, and funded her apartments, costumes, travel, vocal tutors, even a private security detail on one occasion. She was a valuable investment." An investment that came with personal attachments, Poirot said softly. You visited her apartment privately many times. Sir Hugo's face reddened. What are you suggesting? That your affection may not have been unrequited. He slammed his glass on the table. My wife already suspects as much. If you came here to scandalize a dead woman, I suggest you leave. But Poirot remained unmoved. I come not for scandal, but for clarity. Because someone in this household stood to lose something more than pride, if Belladonna made certain truths public. Sir Hugo's face froze. Poirot pressed gently. Did you know she planned to leave London, to accept a role in Milan? I heard rumors. She intended to reveal private correspondences, letters, perhaps even legal demands. She no longer wanted to be owned. Sir Hugo's lips thinned. She was volatile, prone to threats. But you never believed she would act on them. She'd threatened to leave before. Poirot's gaze was piercing, but this time she was serious, and someone, either within this house or close to it, believed her. The next morning, Poirot and Inspector Merton met in Judith Lorne's cluttered office. A new piece had arrived, a photocopy of Belladonna's final contract with the Marchmont Foundation. Take a look, Merton said, handing the page to Poirot. Clause 14, termination penalties. Poirot read silently, then arched a brow. Mon Dieu, if she had broken her contract unilaterally, she would have forfeited all her estate to the foundation. That includes her flat, her savings, her royalties. Everything, Judith added quietly. She asked me about that clause the week before she died. And this clause, Poirot said, is tied directly to a trustee's override authority. He turned the document. Signed by Lady Arabella Marchmont. That same day, Poirot returned to the hospital where Marco Bellini was now conscious. Bandaged and groggy, he blinked at the detective with faint recognition. You saved my life, Marco said weakly. Non, Poirot replied. The surgeon did that. I merely asked questions, and I will ask again now. Who gave you the vial? Marco's eyes moved toward the door. She'll destroy me. Then allow her to destroy herself. The truth protects you now. After a long pause, Marco whispered, It was Judith. She said it was a cleaning solution for polishing silver-threaded costumes. She told me not to ask questions. Poirot's gaze sharpened. And did she ever mention the tiara? No, but the day before Belladonna's death, I saw Judith place something small into a velvet pouch. It wasn't a bottle. Flat, pale. She slipped it into the wardrobe cabinet. Poirot nodded slowly. Merci, Marco. Rest now. You have given me enough. That afternoon, Poirot returned to the opera house one final time. Rehearsal was paused as he slipped into the wardrobe chamber. Alone, he moved quietly toward the lacquered cabinet where Belladonna's tiara had been stored before the performance. He opened the top drawer and scanned its contents. Pins, gloves, velvet cases. And then, tucked beneath a seamstress's measuring tape, a small folded square of pale paper. Poirot opened it carefully. It was a letter, penned in an elegant, looping hand. The ink was faded, but the message clear. You think you can own me, but you forget I have the letters. I kept every one, signed, sealed. You'll lose everything if I speak, and I will. This time, I will. There was no signature, but Poirot did not need one. That evening, he dined alone in his room, reviewing everything. A poisoned tiara, a missing letter, a false lead through graves, a silenced servant, and now, a threat made in writing, hidden like a ticking clock inside a wardrobe drawer. Someone had everything to lose, and had risked everything to preserve it. And now, with one final move, Poirot would open the final curtain. Chapter 11. Tensions rise and masks slip. The sky over London had darkened to a moody bruise by the time Hercule Poirot summoned the principal players to the Marchmont estate once more. Thunder growled in the distance as the assembled group filed into the grand drawing-room. Lady Arabella, Sir Hugo, Judith Lorne, Celeste Dupont, and Elliot Graves. Each looked wearier than before, as though the performance they were trapped in had run too long. This time, Poirot did not stand. He sat, legs crossed, a cane resting beside him, though he did not need it. The letter, now sealed in an envelope, lay upon the table before him. "You will forgive me, mes amis," he said softly, "if I dispense with niceties. The hour is late, and the truth does not like to be kept waiting." Judith raised a brow. "Then I suggest you present your truth, Monsieur Poirot." He nodded. "Very well. First, let us speak of Belladonna's intention to leave London, and the financial ruin that would follow, due to a clause in her contract, a clause inserted and signed by Lady Arabella Marchmont." Arabella's lips parted, but no sound came. "She was blackmailing someone," Poirot continued, "and that someone had written personal letters, letters which, if made public, would cause disgrace, not only to the signer, but to this entire foundation, to this family." Sir Hugo looked at his wife, his expression unreadable. Poirot leaned forward. She was silenced, not simply because she was cruel or ambitious, but because she knew too much. "I assume," said Judith coldly, "that you have proof?" "I have," said Poirot, tapping the envelope. "The letter she wrote to her blackmailer, found hidden in the wardrobe room, deliberately concealed. A cry of defiance before death." Lady Arabella stood. "That proves nothing. Anyone could have written it." "No," Poirot said. "The paper is of the same monogrammed stationery Belladonna used for her personal correspondences. Her ink, her flourish on the R's and Y's. It is unmistakable. I have consulted a graphologist." Arabella's hands curled into fists. "So she threatened someone. She did that all the time. It does not mean I, or anyone, killed her." "No," Poirot said softly, "but it tells us the motive, and with motive clear, we need only to find the moment where action is aligned with opportunity." He turned his gaze to Judith. "You instructed Marco Bellini to handle a mysterious vial, lied to him, told him it was a costume cleaner." Judith's eyes didn't flicker. "I told him to polish the fabric threads of the cloak Belladonna wore in the third act, not the tiara." "But you knew," Poirot said, "that the cloak and the tiara were stored together, and that Belladonna often applied her own makeup and jewelry, alone. The poison would be transferred, slowly, invisibly, through her fingertips to her skin." Merton, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "You had access. You handled every wardrobe item before the show." "And you tampered with the tiara pouch," Poirot added. "Celeste saw you place something inside." Judith finally spoke, her voice low. "If you're accusing me, I suggest you do so directly." "Not yet," Poirot said calmly, "because you were used. You may have prepared the stage, but someone else wrote the final scene." Silence fell across the room. Poirot turned again, slowly, toward Lady Arabella. "You did not kill Belladonna with your own hands, madame, but you orchestrated her downfall, through threats, through pressure, through fear." Arabella's voice shook, not with fear, but fury. "She was going to ruin us. Everything we built, the foundation, the family name." "She wanted her freedom," Poirot said, "and you could not allow it. She was manipulative, dangerous. She told me she would accuse Hugo of abuse, said she'd twist the truth to destroy us." "She knew which strings to pull," Sir Hugo muttered bitterly. Poirot looked at him gently. "And you, monsieur, did you love her?" A pause. Then quietly. "Once. A long time ago." Poirot nodded. "Then perhaps you understand why she became a threat." Not because she held power, but because she refused to be controlled. Lady Arabella straightened her back. You have no proof I had anything to do with this. You knew about Judith's access, about the vial. You steered her hand. Speculation, Arabella snapped. Perhaps, Poirot said, lifting the envelope once more. But now we add Marco Bellini, attacked in fear, a button torn from your coat. You struck him because you were afraid he would speak. I was frightened, she blurted, then stopped. The silence that followed was deadly. Poirot stood. Merci, madame. That was all I needed. As Lady Arabella collapsed into the armchair, breath heavy, Judith stared at her, stunned. You used me, Judith whispered. You made me a part of this. I saved you, Arabella spat. She would have ruined us all. Poirot turned to Merton. You may arrest her now, Inspector. Merton nodded and stepped forward, producing a pair of silver handcuffs. Lady Arabella did not resist. As she was led away, Poirot looked to Judith and Sir Hugo. In theatre, as in life, he said, the mask eventually slips. Chapter 12. The confrontation you didn't see. Coming. The rain had ceased by morning, but inside Poirot's mind, the storm continued. Lady Arabella's arrest had created ripples across the opera house and society circles alike. Headlines whispered of scandal, motive, privilege. The Marchmont Foundation released a carefully worded statement, and rehearsals resumed with forced smiles and careful silence. But Poirot was not yet at peace. He sat in a velvet-cushioned chair at Judith Lorne's office, hands laced together, eyes narrowed not in satisfaction, but suspicion. Something troubles you, Judith said quietly, pouring tea for them both. Poirot gave a faint nod. Lady Arabella is guilty, yes. But guilt, madame, is rarely singular. It clings, like perfume, to those near the crime. Judith lowered her eyes. Are you suggesting someone else helped her? Poirot's voice was soft. Not helped. Perhaps manipulated. Judith placed the teapot down with care. You still think there is another hand. Oui, there was too much precision in the poisoning, too much understanding of stage habits. Arabella was calculating, yes, but not theatrical. He leaned closer. You, however, are both. Judith froze. What are you implying? That Belladonna's downfall was not simply a plot of revenge, but one of envy, of replacement. He stood and walked to a bookshelf, where he gently picked up a faded photograph in a silver frame. A younger Judith, in costume, mid-bow under a spotlight. A name was engraved at the bottom, Judith Lorne, prima donna, La Traviata, 1988. You were once the star, Poirot said. Then the voice faded. The critics turned, and Belladonna took your place. Judith's face was still. That's theatre. Poirot nodded. But you remained, beneath the spotlight, in the shadows, dressing the very woman who stole your crown. I dressed dozens, she said calmly. Yes, but only one broke you. Judith looked away. She was cruel, Poirot. She mocked me, said I smelled of mothballs and old regrets. Poirot turned to face her fully. So when Lady Arabella approached you, desperate to preserve her family's name, you did not resist. Judith's hands shook slightly. I never meant to kill her, just scare her. Teach her humility. Poirot's tone darkened. You diluted the toxin, you timed the application, you ensured it would enter through her fingertips, just enough to make her ill. She wasn't supposed to die, Judith whispered. Just collapse. Miss a performance. Let Celeste take the stage for one glorious night. But she had a weak heart, Poirot said. You didn't know. Or perhaps you did. Judith's lips parted, then closed again. He continued, when Marco started asking questions, Arabella panicked. But you let her take the fall. Silence. Poirot reached into his coat pocket and placed a second letter on the table, one Judith did not know he had found. "If this doesn't work, I want you to know I forgive you. Perhaps it will be your moment again, after all." It was unsigned, but folded in Belladonna's handwriting. Judith stared at it. She knew. "She always knew," Poirot said gently. Judith began to cry, not with hysteria, but with exhaustion. "I thought I could disappear after, resign, let Arabella take the blame, but then Marco was attacked, and everything spun out of control." "You could have stopped it," Poirot said. "Instead, you allowed the drama to play out." Judith stood suddenly. "What now? I surrender too?" Poirot's voice was measured. "You will testify. And then the law will decide whether vengeance disguised as theater is still a crime." That evening, Poirot walked the corridors of the opera house one final time. The tiara had been returned to its case. Celeste's name now adorned the posters outside. Elliot Graves rehearsed without arrogance. Sir Hugo, withdrawn from public view, remained silent through the scandal. Poirot paused before the main stage and looked up at the empty balconies. So many watched in silence. But justice, he knew, was not for the audience. It was for the soul. As he turned to leave, Celeste appeared, clutching a single red rose. "She gave this to me once," she said, smiling faintly. "When I was still in the chorus. Said I had a voice worth ruining." Poirot smiled. She was many things. Cruel, clever, but never blind. Celeste placed the rose on the center of the stage. Poirot bowed his head. Fin de l'acte. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. It was just after dawn when the telephone rang in Poirot's hotel suite. The sun was barely lifting over the rooftops of London, and yet the urgency in Inspector Merton's voice cut through the morning calm like a razor. "She's gone," Merton said breathlessly. "Judith Lorne, vanished sometime during the night." Poirot stood, already dressing. "Comment?" "But she was under watch. 2 constables outside her flat, but she gave them the slip. Disappeared through the service entrance, left her personal effects behind. No suitcase, no purse." Poirot tightened his tie. "She does not intend to vanish forever, only long enough to control the story." Merton exhaled. "We've circulated her description to all ports and stations." "No," Poirot replied sharply. "She will not run far. Judith Lorne is a woman of theatre. She will make her exit as dramatically as her entrance." By noon, the opera house was in turmoil once again. Judith's disappearance had spread among the company like wildfire. Some whispered she had fled to France, others that she had drowned herself in shame. Celeste Dupont refused to leave her dressing room. Poirot, however, remained oddly calm as he paced the orchestra pit, eyes scanning the velvet-draped balconies and upper levels. "She's here," he said quietly. Inspector Merton, beside him, blinked. "Here? You think she came back to the scene?" Poirot nodded. "For her, the stage is not merely a place. It is an identity. She would not allow the final act to be written without her." He pointed upward. The lighting loft, the only place where she could see the stage, without being seen herself. Minutes later, a small search party, led by Poirot and Merton, ascended the narrow, creaking staircase that led to the catwalks above the grand chandelier. The scent of dust and burnt rope filled the air. High above the world, the silence was almost cathedral-like. There, crouched behind a row of old lighting equipment, was Judith. She did not resist. As they approached, she stood slowly, her coat wrapped tightly around her, eyes hollow. "I knew you'd find me," she said. Poirot stepped forward gently. "It is not yet too late to act with dignity." Judith laughed, short and bitter. "Dignity? I have none left. I'm the woman who poisoned a tiara and let a fool of a dowager take the blame." Poirot tilted his head. "Why return?" "Because," she said, stepping toward the edge and looking down at the stage below, "this is the only place that still listens." Merton stepped forward carefully. "Come down, Miss Lorne. No more drama." But Judith shook her head. "Don't you understand? I spent my whole life climbing toward that spotlight, and just when I neared it, it turned away. No applause, just dust." Poirot's voice was firm, but calm. "You can face this, madame. Not as a villain, but as a woman who lost her way." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't want her to die." "Truly?" Poirot nodded. "I believe you." Judith turned back toward the stairway and sighed. "I suppose this is my curtain call." Downstairs, the news of Judith's capture rippled quickly. By late afternoon, she sat in a quiet interrogation room, accompanied by both Poirot and Merton. Her confession came not with drama, but quiet resolve. "She mocked me for years," Judith said. "Reminds me of everything I used to be. Arabella wanted her silence. I wanted her to be humble. We made a terrible partnership." "You orchestrated the placement of the poison," Merton said. "I instructed Marco to polish the cloak. Arabella wanted something stronger, but I insisted on a diluted dose. It was meant to cause fainting, nausea, nothing more." Poirot asked, "And the letter?" Judith sighed. "Belladonna wrote it and left it in my office, thinking I'd deliver it to Arabella. I hid it. I didn't want her to leave. I wanted her to fall right here, on stage." "You underestimated her condition," Poirot said. "I underestimated her heart," Judith whispered. Outside the police station, Poirot stood beneath a grey sky, watching raindrops begin to fall once more. The city moved around him, alive and unaware of the drama that had just ended. Inspector Merton joined him on the steps. "Well," he said, "you've done it again. 2 women, both guilty, one a manipulator, the other a broken star." Poirot gave a soft, sad smile. But do not forget, mon ami, guilt is rarely so neatly divided. Sometimes it is stitched together like a costume, threads from many hands." "And justice?" Poirot looked up at the rain. "Justice has many forms. The court will decide their fate. But for now, the opera may sing again." Merton shook his head in quiet awe. "It always amazes me how you see what others miss." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "It is the tragedy, the vanity, the desperation, human nature, my friend. It always reveals itself in the end." Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The following day, as the city of London settled into the mundane rhythm of mid-morning life, Poirot sat once more in the reading room of the Marchmont estate, the fire crackling gently in the hearth. A calm had descended across the household since Judith's confession and Arabella's arrest, yet Poirot's mind refused to rest. He sat with a single envelope before him, the final letter from Belladonna, found in the wardrobe drawer. He had read it dozens of times. Still, something lingered, an unease, an imperfection in the narrative. As he sipped his chocolate, he reached into his notebook and scanned his handwriting. Lady Arabella, motive rooted in protection and shame. Judith, envy, loss, humiliation, yes. Marco Bellini, used as a tool, then silenced. Sir Hugo, strangely quiet. Too quiet. Poirot tapped his pen against the table. There was one element that remained unexplained, one shadow still unexamined. He rose and walked to the hallway, where the Marchmont family portraits hung like silent witnesses. Sir Hugo Marchmont's painting stood slightly apart from the others, his eyes stern, his mouth set, his military medals gleaming. Poirot studied it thoughtfully, then requested a private word with the man himself. An hour later, Sir Hugo entered the study with a stiffness not entirely attributable to age. "You wish to see me, Monsieur Poirot?" Poirot gestured to the seat opposite. "Only briefly, monsieur. I require your insight on a matter which continues to puzzle me." Sir Hugo sat. "Then I will do what I can." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "I find it most curious that in all this, despite being the most intimately connected to Belladonna, you have remained uninvolved." "I've spoken when needed." "Precisely," Poirot said. "No more, no less." A man whose reputation teetered on the edge of scandal, yet who maintained calm throughout. Too calm. Sir Hugo raised an eyebrow. "Are you suggesting I'm guilty of something?" "I suggest, monsieur," Poirot said gently, "that you may be guilty of omission." Poirot opened the letter again, pointing to the final line. "Perhaps it will be your moment again after all." "That line was not written to Arabella," Poirot said softly, "nor to Judith." Sir Hugo was motionless. "It was written to you," Poirot continued. "She kept your letters, yes. But she also knew you were tired of her, that the investment no longer held its value, that you no longer loved her. She would expose your indiscretions, not to ruin you, but because she refused to be discarded." Sir Hugo exhaled slowly, leaning back. "She became unpredictable," he said at last. "When we ended things, she said she would tell Arabella everything, reveal the letters. I was tired of the deception. I told her, 'Go ahead.'" Poirot nodded. "And yet, she died before she could." A beat of silence passed. "I did not poison her," Sir Hugo said. "Nor did I conspire to. Arabella came to me in confidence, said she suspected Belladonna might try something dangerous, that she needed precautions. I gave her permission to act discreetly." "You let Arabella and Judith carry out the scheme," Poirot said. "I turned my face," Sir Hugo replied. "I did not ask questions, and I did not stop it when I could have. That is my crime." Poirot regarded him evenly. "In truth, monsieur, you allowed a performance to go forward knowing it would end in tragedy." Sir Hugo looked at the fireplace. "I suppose," he said bitterly, "that makes me worse than either of them." Poirot said nothing. After a long silence, Sir Hugo asked, "Will you tell the police?" Poirot rose slowly. "No. You committed no crime that the law would prosecute, but your conscience, I think, will not be so kind." As he turned to leave, Sir Hugo's voice stopped him. "Poirot." "Oui. Do you think she would have forgiven me?" Poirot paused at the door. "No, but she would have understood." That evening, Poirot returned to his suite. Outside, the city lights glittered, and the Opera House marquee announced the new performance with Celeste Dupont in the lead. In the silence, Poirot opened a small case on his desk and removed a single object, a small brooch shaped like a silver swan, given to him by Belladonna herself during their first meeting in Paris many years ago. She had once told him, "A diva never dies quietly, Poirot. We leave echoes." Indeed, she had. He placed the brooch beside his cufflinks, the final piece falling gently into place. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. The drawing room of the Marchmont estate had seen many performances over the years, elegant soirees, political discussions, artistic arguments, but never one quite like this. The afternoon sun filtered weakly through the tall windows as Poirot stood at the fireplace, the heat of the flames flickering softly behind him. Before him sat a half-circle of familiar faces. Sir Hugo Marchmont, his expression carved in granite. Celeste Dupont, quiet but alert. Inspector Merton, notebook in hand. Judith Lorne, escorted by a constable but no longer in denial. And Marco Bellini, his arm still in a sling, looking pale but recovered. An air of expectancy hung in the room like dust in sunlight. Poirot cleared his throat. "Mes amis," he began, You have been most patient. You have endured scandal, fear, and suspicion. But now, with your indulgence, I will explain what truly happened behind the velvet curtain of this mystery." Merton closed his notebook and sat forward. Poirot stepped toward the center of the room. The death of La Belladonna was not, as it first appeared, the work of jealousy or momentary madness. It was the result of a careful, layered conspiracy, fueled by pride, envy, and above all, silence. He turned to Judith. "You, madame, diluted a rare toxin and applied it to the costume of a woman you once admired, then came to loathe. Not because she replaced you on stage, but because she reminded you daily of your own fading glory. You did not intend to kill, but you did intend to strike her down." Judith nodded slowly. "I admit it." Poirot pivoted slightly. "And Lady Arabella Marchmont?" She saw in Belladonna a threat to the legacy she had worked so hard to preserve. She feared not scandal alone, but exposure. She feared the collapse of everything the Foundation represented. So she encouraged Judith's plan, and when that plan spun out of control, she attempted to silence Marco Bellini to cover their tracks. Marco looked down, his face tense. Poirot raised a finger. But this, my friends, was not a simple case of two conspirators. There was one more piece, one more player who, by doing nothing, allowed everything to proceed. He turned to Sir Hugo. "You, monsieur, knew the risk. You knew the letters existed. You knew Belladonna was reaching her breaking point, and yet you did nothing. You permitted the actions of your wife and your customer to unfold, telling yourself it was no longer your concern." Sir Hugo stared into the fire, his jaw clenched. Poirot's tone softened. "Perhaps you told yourself that it was all theatre, that like any performance it would end with applause. But this stage, this one, was real, and it ended in death." A long silence followed. Poirot took a breath and continued. "Belladonna was not innocent. She manipulated, threatened, and provoked. But she did not deserve to die, and the law, imperfect though it is, must now weigh what justice means in this tragic tableau." Merton spoke up. "Judith will stand trial. Lady Arabella already awaits arraignment. As for Sir Hugo—" He hesitated. Poirot answered for him. "His crime was silence. A silence that will echo far louder than any verdict." Celeste raised her hand. "What happens now?" Poirot looked at her with a soft smile. "Now, mademoiselle, the curtain falls, and a new performance begins." Later, as the guests departed one by one, Poirot remained behind, gazing out the window at the slowly darkening sky. A servant entered quietly and handed him a sealed envelope. "From Lady Arabella," the man said. "Sent from the magistrate's holding room." Poirot nodded and opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. "You win, Monsieur Poirot. But tell me, what use is truth when everyone walks away stained by it? Even you." Poirot folded the letter and placed it into his coat pocket. He looked back once more at the now empty chairs, the scattered teacups, the faint scent of jasmine still lingering in the air. He whispered to himself, "La vérité, it never arrives clean, but it always arrives." And with that, he turned toward the door, cane in hand, and left the Marchmont estate for the final time. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The great hall of the Royal Lyric Opera House shimmered under the final rays of a setting sun. Velvet curtains were drawn, the chandeliers lit like constellations suspended from gilded ceilings. The house was closed for the night, but within its walls, one final performance remained. This time without orchestra, audience, or applause. Poirot stood at the center of the stage, hands clasped behind his back, facing a semicircle of familiar faces. Inspector Merton, Judith Lorne under guard, Celeste Dupont, Sir Hugo Marchmont, and Marco Bellini. The house was silent except for the distant creak of old timbers, as though even the building listened. "This, mes amis," Poirot began gently, "is the final act." He let the words echo, drawing every eye to him. "You have all heard parts of the tale. Now you shall hear all of it, without omission, without embellishment." He paced slowly across the stage, where the tragedy had begun. "Let us begin, not with the poison, but with the plan. A plan born not of hatred, but humiliation. Judith Lorne, once a prima donna, stood in the wings while her successor, Belladonna, mocked and belittled her. Enter Lady Arabella, desperate to suppress scandal, terrified of disgrace. Two women with different motives, bound together in silence. Judith lowered her eyes. Judith was instructed to weaken Belladonna before the season's end. Not kill her. Not destroy her career. Just ensure she faltered. Enough for a quiet departure. The poison was chosen for its subtleness, its invisibility. Belladonna applied her own stage powder, touched her own costume. The toxin would do the rest. Poirot turned toward Marco, but they did not count on the humanity of others. Marco Bellini, unsuspecting and loyal, questioned what he had seen, and in doing so, he became a threat. Marco's jaw tightened. "They used me." Poirot nodded solemnly. Yes. Arabella struck him in panic, not to kill, but to silence, to delay. He then turned to Sir Hugo. "And you, monsieur, permitted all of it. Your former lover's letters, her threats, the deterioration of her health. You turned your gaze away. You believed you could remain untouched by the outcome." Sir Hugo met Poirot's gaze but said nothing. Poirot stopped center stage. But what no one anticipated, what unraveled the scheme, was Belladonna herself. She was not a fool. She knew she was being poisoned. And she left a trail. The letter, the brooch, her final words to Celeste and Marco. She knew she was doomed, and yet she gave you all a final chance to stop it. He paused. "None of you took it." A heavy silence descended. Poirot walked forward, his voice low but clear. This was not a murder born in darkness, but in the spotlight. It happened in plain view, and yet no one truly saw it. Each of you played a role, but the curtain has fallen, and now the truth has taken its bow. Judith broke the silence. "She deserved better," she whispered, "even at her worst." Poirot regarded her gently. "We all deserve better, madame, but justice is not about deserving. It is about truth." Merton stepped forward. "With your statement complete, Monsieur Poirot, I will be taking Miss Lorne back to custody. The Crown will prepare charges." Judith did not resist. As she passed Poirot, she met his eyes. "You were right," she said quietly. "In the end, all masks slip." Poirot inclined his head. Outside the opera house, the streets buzzed with the hum of the evening crowd. Posters advertising Celeste Dupont's debut as leading soprano fluttered in the breeze. Life moved forward. Poirot stood at the top of the theatre steps, looking out across the lights of Covent Garden. Merton joined him. "You've solved murders before, Poirot, but this one, it wasn't just about death." "No," Poirot said. "It was about identity, about legacy, about people clinging to fading roles, too afraid to step off the stage." "And you?" Merton asked. "No stage for you." Poirot gave a small, wistful smile. "Ah, but Inspector, I prefer to remain in the audience, watching, listening, until the final act arrives." As the theatre doors closed behind them, Poirot turned one last time to glance at the ground facade. "Justice is served," he murmured, "but the heart, it mourns." And with that, Hercule Poirot disappeared into the London night, his coat buttoned tight against the wind, his little grey cells finally at peace. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. The trial was brief, but its shadow lingered long over the opera world. Judith Lorne stood alone in the dock, her once graceful posture wilted beneath the weight of public scrutiny. She did not cry, nor plead. She listened to the prosecution's summary in silence, her expression composed, almost dignified. Lady Arabella Marchmont, by contrast, never appeared in court. Her counsel presented medical certificates attesting to a sudden decline in mental health. She was quietly transferred to a private sanitarium in the countryside. The public was informed of a nervous collapse. No charges were pressed further. Sir Hugo issued a single, formal statement. The Marchmont Foundation condemns the actions taken in its name. We mourn the loss of Belladonna and extend our deepest regrets to all affected. He withdrew from public life shortly after. Marco Bellini, cleared of all suspicion, resigned from his position as wardrobe assistant and quietly left for Rome. A letter arrived months later at Poirot's London address. A simple note of thanks and a photograph of Marco smiling beside his mother in a quiet piazza. Celeste Dupont became the new face of the Royal Lyric Opera. Her debut as Violetta in La Traviata brought the house to its feet, and for a time, London forgot the scandal entirely. Or pretended to. But Poirot did not forget. In his apartment overlooking the Thames, he sat by the fire days after the final verdict. He held a small envelope in his hand, Judith's last letter to him, sent from prison. Monsieur Poirot, I never thanked you for seeing what I had hidden from myself. I lost the music long before I tried to take hers. Perhaps, in silence, I'll hear it again. One day, Poirot folded the letter with care. To the world, justice had been done. The court had spoken. The culprit had confessed. The opera moved on. But in Poirot's heart, the case lingered. Not because of the crime, but because of what it revealed. Pride, pain, fear of irrelevance. The true murderers had worn many faces. As he stood and drew the curtains shut, Poirot whispered to the night, "The tragedy is not the fall, but that no one saw the stage collapsing beneath her feet." Chapter 18. The closing remark. Weeks had passed since the final gavel fell. The opera house sparkled with renewed energy. The Marchmont name remained, faded but intact. The tabloids had found newer scandals. Life, as it always did, moved forward. And yet, in a quiet tea-room near Soho, Hercule Poirot sat across from Captain Arthur Hastings. "You look tired, old friend," Hastings observed, stirring his tea. "Was this case particularly difficult?" Poirot gave a small smile. "Not difficult, mon ami. Subtle. It was a tragedy told in whispers." He sipped slowly, setting the cup down with precision. The poison was not only chemical. It was emotional. Resentment, envy, fear of irrelevance. Those things do not kill quickly, but they kill thoroughly. Hastings frowned. "Do you believe Judith Lorne should have received more sympathy?" Poirot's eyes narrowed, thoughtful. She was not innocent. None of them were. But innocence, Hastings, is rarely a fixed thing. It changes with time, with pain, with pressure. He leaned back. What fascinated me was how each person wore a mask, on and off the stage. Arabella masked her desperation in dignity. Sir Hugo masked his cowardice in decorum. Judith wore regret like rouge, carefully applied. "And you?" Hastings asked with a grin. "Do you wear a mask, Poirot?" "Ah," Poirot chuckled softly. "Only the moustaches, mon ami." They shared a quiet laugh. As the waiter brought the bill, Hastings asked one final question. "Will you miss them, that world of theatre and illusion?" Poirot looked out the window, where a young woman passed by humming an aria from La Traviata. "No," he said, "because it never truly leaves. The world, Hastings, is one grand stage, and the truth, la vérité, always waits for its moment in the spotlight. He placed a tip on the table, adjusted his cuffs, and stood. Come, mon ami, let us go where the music is less tragic. And with that, Hercule Poirot exited stage left, elegantly as always.